And before we begin, can everyone please put their mobile phones in the silent mode so that we can have an undisturbed proceedings? A very good afternoon to everyone. Can we please settle down as we begin the proceedings? It is not afternoon yet. So a very good morning to everyone and a warm welcome on what seems to be rather a cold day. It is indeed a matter of great honor for the Department of History of Scottish Church College to have this opportunity to collaborate with the Women's History Conclave to present to you this program, the 4th Uttara Chakraborty Memorial Lecture. This gives us, the department and the college, to pay our respect to the memory of Professor Chakraborty. This also gives us an occasion to welcome among us one of the most distinguished scholars in women's studies, especially of the colonial time, Professor Geraldine Forbes. On behalf of everyone present here, I extend a very warm welcome to Professor Forbes for agreeing to be among us and to speak to us. I think we are very eager to listen to her, so we will start immediately. We have a very small and a very brief inaugural session, for which I would like to welcome on the dais our principal, Dr. Madhumanjari Mandal, our vice principal, Dr. Supratim Das, and our speaker for the day, Professor Geraldine Forbes. We would begin with the welcome address. I request our principal, Dr. Madhumanjari Mandal, to kindly deliver the welcome address to the audience.
Good morning, everyone, and a very happy New Year 2025 to all of you. So it is my great privilege to welcome our speaker today, Professor Geraldine Forbes, Professor Emerita, Department of History, State University of New York, Oswego, USA. The representatives of Women's History Conclave who have organized this seminar in collaboration with the Department of History, Scottish Church College, our Vice Principal, Sir, Dr. Supratim Das, all internal management committee members of our college, honorable faculty and student members of our college and of different colleges like colleges and universities like Rabindra Bharati University, Jadavpur University, Diamond Harbour for Women College, Herumbo Chandra College, Raja N.L. Khan Women's College, St. Xavier's College, Queen Mary University, Shammilani Mahavidyalaya, Bongobashi College, Mograhat College, Sanskrit College, Kollani University, Tripura Central University, Bardwan University, Calcutta University, because from these colleges and universities, the students and the faculty members, they have registered for this seminar. So I wanted to mention a big list is there. And I really want to mention the names of the colleges and universities so that our speaker may be able to know that from where because now this program will be live, so on YouTube, so they can watch from different corners of the world. So I really want to mention all the universities. Bethune College, University of Oxford, Lady Brabourne College, Sirampur College, Khidirpur College, Kishore Bharat Bhagini Mahavidyalaya, Acharya Prafullo Chandra College, Barashat Government College, Gurudas College, Shofarani Memorial College, Arya Mahila PG College, Sundarban Mahavidyalaya, Egra SSB College, Presidency University, Gobodanga Hindu College, Women's Christian College, B.R. Ambedkar University, Shibpur Dinobandhu College, Vishwabharati University, Bakura University, Raja Narendralal Khan College, Ram Mohan College, Sri Agroshin College, the Bhavanipur Educational Society, University of Hyderabad. So it's a long list, ma'am, for you. Everybody, they are waiting eagerly. Distinguished guests today, ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of Scottish Church College family and Women's History Conclave, I welcome you all today for this special memorial lecture in the name of Dr. Uttara Chakraborty. As a 195 years old institution, we are very happy to host this historical event in our college. Since its inception, this institution has welcomed the co-education, and hence many renowned women are our alumni. I would like to congratulate the organizers and wish you all the best. May God bless us all. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Mandal, for the address. Before we proceed with the session, we would now like to welcome further Professor Forbes by felicitating her with a few gifts. I request Dr. Riddhi Bhattacharya to kindly assist in this matter. I would request our principal, Dr. Madhumanjari Mandal, to kindly felicitate her. Our students, Dhruvo and Devaruti, will be assisting our principal, ma'am. The Uttorio that you see is being gifted is actually made by one of our students as part of our course on batik, which we conduct in the college in collaboration with Amar Kutir, and the bag as well. We are extremely honored that we can gift you with objects which have been made by our students. Inevitable gift in a Bengali Onushthan, I guess. Thank you so much. Thank you, Dhruva, and thank you, Devaruti. I would now like to request our Vice Principal, Dr. Supratim Das, to kindly address the audience on the occasion.
A very good morning. Of course, I express my heartfelt thanks and gratitude to beloved Professor Subhash Ranjan Chakraborty, Women's History Conclave, for choosing Scottish Church College as the venue of this year's lecture, the 4th Uttara Chakraborty Memorial Lecture. Actually, Subhasda and Uttaradi, I knew them since 1990s. Subhasda was not my teacher, but just like one of my teachers. and we had very good experiences. With both of them, I had very pleasant experiences. And also, once again, I would most cordially, most warmly welcome Professor Geraldine Forbes, one of the most well-known experts in gender and women's studies in India, particularly in South Asian history. Now, as a perfect non-expert in gender and women's studies, I would rather not waste time, but just I would like to make present some of my observations, which are of slightly different in temperament. Now, one might argue that historians always write with a view toward both the past and the present. Certainly, attention to these dual temporalities, to both the historical past and the contemporary perspective, helps us to understand the trajectories of research in Indian women's history from its professionalization in the 1970s and 1980s onward. Questions about the post-colonial present, most specifically about the ongoing oppression of women in independent India, despite the promises of anti-colonial nationalism to liberate all its subjects, have echoed across the writing of historians devoted to exploring women's lives and experiences. Historians of women and gender are surely beginning to study independent India. Within the field of South Asian studies, research on the post-1947 era has typically been confined to social scientists, and historians have seldom crossed the colonial-post-colonial divide. With few exceptions, women's and gender history has largely followed these trends. Although several scholars have written chapters in larger works on some aspects of post-colonial history, there have been few attempts, or rather not too many attempts, to conceptualize the key themes or questions arising from historical research on women and gender after 1947. According to some observers, the result of this relative silence among historians is somewhat paradoxical. On the one hand, women's and gender history forcefully demonstrates the patriarchal collusions linking colonialism and nationalism, suggesting that post-colonial Indian modernity remains deeply marked by this intersection. On the other hand, by not engaging with the previous 6 decades of post-colonial history, the scholarship runs a risk of reasserting the divide between colonial and post-colonial that it has sought to dismantle by calling attention to the continuities that characterize gendered discourses in the modern era. Of late, a growing number of researchers are crossing the boundaries that have long separated our study of colonial society from its post-colonial successor. This is an encouraging development indeed, at least as a non-expert I think so, for without engaging Indian history after 1947, the historiography of the modern era risks its own obsoleteness, unable to speak to the ongoing inequalities and hierarchies that mark women's lives and experiences. So these were my humble submission and observations, and I know that all of us, we are very eagerly waiting to listen to Professor Forbes. So over to Srimoy. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you so much, sir. Before we move on, Women's History Conclave would also like to welcome Professor Forbes to this program. I request Professor Aparna Bandyopadhyay to kindly come up and do the needful. Yes, 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 yes.
On behalf of the Women's History Conclave, sorry, very sorry. Here's a small gift for several gifts in one bag for Jenny, for our dear Jenny.
Yes. Today's proceedings, however, will remain incomplete if we don't take a moment to celebrate the life and works of Professor Uttara Chakraborty. I again request Professor Bandyopadhyay to kindly come up on stage and share with us.
Good morning and a happy new year to you all. The Women's History Conclave, in association with the Department of History, Scottish Church College, welcomes you all to the 4th Uttara Chakraborty Memorial Lecture to be delivered by Professor Geraldine Forbes, Distinguished Teaching Professor Emerita, State University of New York, Oswego, USA. Professor Forbes will be speaking on daring to protest, family, culture, and feminism in colonial India. A hearty welcome to you all once again. Professor Uttara Chakraborty was born on 23rd December 1944, and she left us all on 29 November 2020. Uttara Chakraborty was a renowned teacher in history. She had taught history at Loreto College, Darjeeling Government College, Maulana Azad College, Chandannagar College, and Bethune College. After her retirement in December 2004, she was invited to teach at Presidency College and later Presidency University as a guest faculty. Uttaradi was an outstanding pedagogue. She was amazingly popular among her students. I see some of her former students here, Kona, Debosri, and many others. Uttara Chakraborty's, her pupils in different institutions continue to cherish fond memories of her. Uttara Chakraborty's fame as a historian, however, rested not merely on her pedagogic excellence. At Bethune College, where she was posted from 1992 till her retirement in 2004, Uttaradi spearheaded an initiative to build an archive. The chance discovery of papers belonging to the college office in the late 19th and the early 20th centuries opened up a gold mine. The old and withered papers that she had taken such great pains to preserve unfurled unknown facets of the history of this institution, the role of John Drinkwater Bethune, the founder of the school, and also the British women who had been at the helm of the administration of the institution at different points of time. The documents Uttaradi and her team unearthed greatly enhanced our understanding of the contributions of Bethune College to women's higher education and also the role of its students in different strands of India's struggle for freedom, especially revolutionary nationalism. History had to be rewritten, and this task Uttara Chakraborty willingly embraced. She dedicated herself to the task of unraveling the lives and doings of women who had traditionally remained hidden from history. She was especially committed to retrieving Muslim women, marginalized and oppressed by the collusive regimes of patriarchy and community, from the seams of history. The daring exploits of women revolutionaries such as Beena Das, Pritilota Wadedar, and Kalpana Dotto intrigued her, and she delved into archival records, including IB files, to uncover tales of bravery, as well as the daily encounters with patriarchal mindsets that underpinned these revolutionary women's struggles for the nation's liberation. Last year, Sampark Publishing House, spearheaded by Dr. Shunandun Rajodhuri and his able associate Orundhuti Banerjee, paid tribute to Uttara Chakraborty by publishing a collection of essays authored by her at different points of time. Minerva's Daughters, as this anthology has been named, focuses on the lives and doings of women in colonial and post colonial Bengal. The book is a valuable contribution to women's history. I was fortunate in being entrusted with the responsibility of editing this book. The book has reborn this year in a hardcover format. The book is on display at the exhibition put up by Sampark. Uttaradi has also written a biography of her father, Jogind, historian and author of Bonge Mohila Kobi. Please do have a look at these books. They are outside, they're available at the desk put up by Sampark. To honor Uttara Chakraborty's contributions to women's history, the Women's History Conclave has decided to organize a special lecture in her memory every year. The first Uttara Chakraborty Memorial Lecture was delivered by Professor Paula Banerjee, the second one by Professor Oishika Chakraborty, and the third by Dr. Rongili Biswas, and the fourth is really an honor that we have with us Professor Geraldine Forbes, who will be delivering the fourth Uttara Chakraborty Memorial Lecture. In this connection, I wish to say a few words about the Women's History Conclave. The conclave, as some of you may know, had started its journey in October 2020 as an online platform for engaging with women's history. The conclave has organized as many as 40 events till this date, and this includes lectures, panel discussions, as well as informal conversations and addas. Most of these events were held online, facilitating the involvement of stalwarts of women's history from all parts of the globe. Now, let me add that Professor Geraldine Forbes has been with the Women's History Conclave right since its inception. And as far as I remember, she delivered a lecture in November 2020. And Uttaradi was supposed to deliver to speak on Rokia in December 2020, but unfortunately, it's a great misfortune for all of us. She passed away a few days before the lecture. She was eagerly looking forward to that lecture, but, well, it's a big loss. I mean, her passing away has been a big loss for all of us. Now, well, we hope to organize more events in the future, more offline events too in the future, and this particular lecture series, Uttara Chakraborty Memorial Lecture, is being held in person since 2021. The first one was held online, but subsequently we have been able to organize it in person thanks to institutions like Bethune College and Jadavpur University, Bethune College, and Scottish Church College. And till date, our experience has been the best at Scottish Church College. It was not very good last year. I mean, I'm very sorry to say we had a lot of problems last year, but this year this has been so smooth. I mean, the entire organizational procedure has been so smooth, and we have such dynamic faculty members here, and of course a very dynamic principal and vice principal. So I think this has been the best, and I think this will remain the best. And please be with us in our journey ahead, and let us work together to bring back women to history. And this is what Uttaradi has been doing all her life. So, and now, yes, once again to Srimoy.
Thank you so much, ma'am. We do have a very active women and gender development cell guided by Dr. Ishita Shur. So we do hope to collaborate further in the future. And thank you so much for your kind words. It's now time to move to the Yes, to the main event. But before that, we have a formal introduction of the speaker, even though I think Professor Forbes needs no introduction at all. But I would like to request Professor Bhaswati Chatterjee of the Women's History Conclave to kindly do the honors before we proceed to the lecture. Before I hand over to Professor Chatterjee, please make sure that your phones are on silent during the lecture. Even though in a memorial lecture, traditionally we don't have question answer sessions, but because we have Professor Forbes with us, so we cannot really miss the opportunity. So we will have a short interactive session after the lecture. So please keep your questions to yourself till then. Professor Chatterjee.
Warm welcome to everyone. As Srimoy already mentioned, that Professor Forbes needs no introduction, and it's my privilege and honor to still, it's a formality, and I have to introduce the speaker. So, Professor Geraldine Forbes is Professor Emerita in the Department of History and the program in Women's and Gender Studies, State University of New York, Oswego. A pioneer in researching and writing women's history in colonial India, she has edited the memoirs of 3 Indian women, Sudha Majumdar, Manmohini Jutsi Sehgal, and Hoimobati Sen. Her other publications include Women in Modern India, as we all know, Indian Women and the Freedom Movement, Women in Colonial India, Essays on Politics, Medicine and Historiography, Lost Letters and Feminist History, the Political Leadership of Mohandas K. Gandhi and Sarala Devi Chaudhurani, Positivism in Bengal, and several other articles and book chapters. In 2024, she was consultant for the Forgotten Crimes podcast, Murder in Bengal, in which she told the story of the murder of Elokeshi in Tarakeshwar in 1873. She is now retired and is researching the life and work of an American Baptist missionary in the Naga Hills in the late 19th and early 20th century. So it's up to, I think we should now take Srimoy, please do the honor.
Over there, I think, because I need to.
Sliders over there.
You can just slide the slide, so because we have the.
I'll probably be more comfortable standing.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Can we just click on that?
Yes.
See the PowerPoint.
Ishita, একটু আলোগুলো একটু নেভানোর Yes.
Just no.
I'll
Click on
open the
PowerPoint.
yes.
It's there.
And ma'am, you can use this
Or I
to
can-
switch your
or I
slides,
can
or you can use this,
click on-
whichever is.
Okay. I think it's just, okay, is it, we need to get it as a PowerPoint there.
Yes,
Okay,
it is
good, it's all set.
আমি জিজ্ঞেস করে নিই। Yes, this is the button, or you can use this. Would you be using more
Can-
comfortable with the cordless?
No, I think because I need my notes. So if we can pull this down, or does it come down a little?
You can adjust for it.
I think, does it come down? I don't know. Oh, good, okay. A little more, I think. Is that about good? Okay. No, because I need to look down and speak. So can we put this a little over there? I think so. Good morning. Still? Yes? And Happy New Year. Is the voice all right? Thank you so much. I'm a bit overwhelmed by the introductions, but let me say what a great honor it is to be giving the fourth Uttara Chakraborty Memorial Lecture. I am truly honored because of her work, but because also of the kind of recognition this is of women's history. It is truly truly wonderful. And I would like to thank both the principal and the vice principal for all they have done to organize this. Professor Chakraborty for greeting me here and feeling that it was fine for me to be here to honor his wife's work. I think what you have is two of the really distinguished historians that are being honoring Uttara and also her husband at the same time. The book, and I do have to mention the book Minerva's Daughters, which really is a wonderful collection guided through with the help of Aparna Bandyopadhyay and published by Sampark. So if you haven't read it yet or looked at it, I think there's a chance to get the book today. It is really, really a treasure in terms of the articles that were published in different places that have been brought together in one. And it is a pioneering work of women's history. I was invited by Aparna and Baswati to come and give this address, and they have already mentioned the Women's History Conclave, which deserves a second mention. This started during COVID when we were all locked in and we could go on our screens and talk and think about women's history. This is really wonderful. I would like to thank Scottish Church for hosting this. So I'm going to talk about something that I am thinking about now. So I am sharing with you maybe half-baked ideas. They're not I'm not completely sure that I agree with myself. All right, so if any of you say, no, I think she's off base, I really would like to hear from you, perhaps if we have time today during questions and answers. I'm really looking for kind of ways that people will react to what I'm doing. So I'm talking about family culture and feminism, putting together two things I really haven't put together before. All right, I've got there two quotes, right? So the first one, the personal is political. I think anyone who studies women's studies in India ends up studying this at some point. It's often attributed to Kate Millett, but in fact, we don't know who was the first person ever to write or say it, but it's a kind of statement that's made often in women and gender studies, that the personal is political, that we can't think of marriage or motherhood or nurturing or cooking or house cleaning or any of those things without thinking of women, in the same sense that we can't think about war just as something men are involved in. So the personal is political, I guess, and the political is personal. The second one, though, you may not be so familiar with. Rajwari Nehru, I do not think that the home should be made a forum for women's battles. And this is kind of what I am going to talk about, these two statements and how one is American, but the personal is political, I think is something talked about worldwide. But Rameshwari's statement seems like a contradiction to the first. So this is something I want to address. Rameshwari Nehru was not an outlier. That statement that the home should not be made a forum for women's battles was accepted and articulated by many other women who were prominent in the 30s. So this is what I am going to address. Okay. I'm talking about the activist women, and I'm really focusing on the late 20s, the 30s, and the 40s. Oh, and I appreciate this comment about maybe we no longer have to stop like I did and so many did with independence in 1947. These are women, and I've just selected a couple of photographs. They addressed and fought for women's rights, but they did not endorse a gendered analysis of their society. Many of these women also failed to engage with issues of caste and class, which I won't address today. Other people have addressed it. It's something we really need to talk about. But the most common explanation for the fact that these activist women avoided talking about a kind of battle between the sexes was that that would have been very divisive during the nationalist struggle, that you can only fight one battle at a time. So what I want to do is to think about that. Think about how these activist women did not talk about gender. They didn't talk very often about how gender affected their personal lives. This was, and some of them are very dramatic. Sarojini Naidu stated clearly, I am not a feminist, and many others did. So this is, I think, a topic we need to address. I'm going to do it. I'm moving outside of Bengal and looking at the life history of a woman called Krishnabai Rao Nimkar, who was born in 1906. So she's a contemporary of many of the women I've studied. Our histories, including my own, of these women generally focus on their public lives. That's what we can research. We can look at what they did. We can look at their marches. We can look at their political speeches. And people so often say, Gandhi brought the women out without actually looking at the personal difficulties these women faced. And we don't ask questions like, who took care of the house and the children? Who cooked? Who protected these women from harassment and even assault? And this was, I was going to say, Aparna's work is really fabulous because she goes from the public into the private realm. Now, I don't think we as historians at fault. One of our huge problems is records. And it is very difficult for us to address the private lives of women along with the public. So I am focusing on this woman, obviously not a Bengali, because of the extraordinary sources we have. And they make it possible for us to address not just her public life, but her private. All right, now these women, just generalize about them, they actually accomplished everything they did in spite of society. That was against all odds. Laws, customs, lack of opportunities for education, jobs were scarce, and an environment that discouraged women's public behavior. So these women, I'm trying to argue today, were activists because of their families. And I want to address both the family of birth, the natal family, and the family they marry into, because those are two families that women have, and sort of think about these and how they influence what these women could do. So I would argue, even though mothers are important, many were educated because their fathers believed in women's education. They joined politics and social reform with their fathers, and then after marriage, with their husbands' consent. And in some cases, I've studied women who didn't join because they were not allowed to go out. And they relied often on the protection of male family members, the larger kin. So I can think of so many women who perhaps had something they demonstrated because their fathers were in favor of it. And I'm thinking now about Sarla Devi Chodurani, who attended lectures because she could go with male members of the family who would be there when she's in a classroom full of men. Now, all right, so the archives just a picture of archives. My work at the beginning involved very conventional archives. And we, as historians, people say, can you find it in the archive when you're starting to research a topic? So for women, we've had to go outside something like the National Library or the State Archives. We've looked at women's journals, newspapers, personal papers when they existed, interviews. I'm not daring enough, but other people have, of course, looked a lot at literature. And so we have to go a bit away from the conventional archive. And for me, this has been, I'm older than, I think, everyone in the audience. All right. So I was very fortunate. Okay, it's yelling. I'm very fortunate in that I've been able to I was able to interview years ago some very important, prominent women. All right, so we're getting the mic straight? Okay. Got it? All right, sorry about that. In 1980, I began examining family photographs, and these are just photographs of photographic albums. This is my frustration with trying to understand, women like I got to interview Kalpana Dutt Joshi. So wondering about these young women and the acts that they did to try to further the independence movement, to think about their own lives. I was able to interview them and found that some women showed me pictures and then said, I haven't written about this, I have no records about it, but look at this photograph. So it was their own suggestions that led me to think about looking at photographs and asking women to describe what they saw or remembered when they looked at a photograph from their own family album. Those albums seldom have pictures of women out marching and demonstrating, but sometimes they do. And at other times, they have photographs of women coming out of jail. So I was surprised to see this, to see a kind of party celebrating the women who had been imprisoned, and think about what this looked like and how people felicitated them. All right, so what I found was the life histories they told, or the way they described their childhood, growing up, their public actions, were different than any written account I had. And we do have accounts. The Nehru Library, of course, has a wonderful collection of interviews of freedom fighters. Other people have done this. Women have written about themselves. But it was my work with history and photography that led me to think about how I need to, and others maybe, think about women within their families. Think about when you go out and do something political or social, there's a family behind that and a family you return to. Those families, I thought we need to look at for women's questions like motivation and who were their mentors? Who sustained them? Seriously, if a woman had small children, who took care of the children when she was out marching in the streets and in some cases went to jail? It became a question for me because women showed me their albums. Not that one I didn't come to on my own. So this is what I'm trying to do today. Now, these women with the photographs all belong to families that were urban, modernizing for the times, westernized, middle class. I need just water. Let me just, sorry. Stop in the middle. So their families, I'm saying, were urban, modernizing, westernized, middle class, and involved with the new professions. So there's a lot of change going on this is sort of late colonialism. Now, this description would include many families living in Calcutta of that time, or Bombay at the turn of the century, but only a few families produced a Renika Rai or, say, a Beena Das. So this is kind of a question is, what kind of family produces these women, and what nurtures and sustains them as they go about their work, and kind of what role does this play in their ideas? Okay, so I'm going to go now to this woman. So Krishnabai is the baby seated on the lap. I'm going to show you a number of photographs, talk about them, and then come to a conclusion. And I want to talk about family culture. So Krishnabai was a Maharashtrian woman, born and educated in Madras, now Chennai. She was a student activist. She joined the Gandhian movement, and she was an activist throughout her long life. Now, the archives to study her include newspapers. She appears in lots of accounts. A Nehru Museum Freedom Fighters interview, a very lengthy one. Her personal collection of papers and records. Her autobiographical writings, some are published, some unpublished. A biography she wrote of her mother. And her telling of her photographs as she took them out of a box and showed them to me one by one. Now, I want to talk about her family culture, the family she was born into. This is the family you see here. And then her family with her husband and how they nurtured, protected, and encouraged her activism. And I'm looking at the extent to which these experiences also shaped the kind of feminism she espoused. Okay. So, all right, now I need to just stop. Many of the women I study would never call themselves feminist. And as I said, that some of them, like Sarojini Naidu, said, I'm not a feminist, but I'm going to just step away from what they said, or maybe some of the ideas in our head, and take a very simple definition of feminism. So one, women are subordinate. You know, we can argue here and there. This woman's bossy, this woman's rich, whatever. But basically, just look at laws, structures. Women are subordinate. And the second part is that's not right. It's not okay. Subordination is not okay. And then third, we should do something about it. That is so simple. It's a simple definition I'm going to use, that many of the women that I studied were feminists according to that definition. They didn't accept this, or they wouldn't have read Kate Millett, but they were feminists. So this is a studio photograph, 1911. Okay, at the top, all right, I have to think. Yeah, top right is Krishnabai's elder brother. Then seated in front on the right-hand side is an elder sister. On the left is her, again, second sister. She's on her father's lap, and there's one child that's going to be born later. All right. The mother and father become involved with the Theosophical Society in Ajar, which had all of, Annie Besant and the other ideas about India and against child marriage, but a lot of focus on Indian culture. And Kamalabai, the mother, joined the Tamil Ladies Association. It's one of the earliest organizations. It became the Women's Indian Association, the first women's association in India to ask for the vote for women. And they asked for it on the same grounds as men. So India had a movement for the vote as early as most other countries. You're the same as the UK, pretty much the same as England, and other countries are later. Now, this family, because of Theosophical Society, Ladies' Society, did not believe in child marriage. But, and that's a later picture you can see on the right of the family. So Krishnabai there is seated in front. Actually, she's in the middle. I'm sorry, that's a little brother in the middle with longish hair. But, okay, so when you look at early photographs, don't make judgments about gender. Lots of little girls. Beena Das was often dressed up as a little boy in the early family photographs. Now, this is on the left, Krishna Bai's eldest sister, the eldest sister in the family, who was married, you can see this, was a child bride, even though the mother and father did not believe in child marriage. This is 1916. Indira Bai was married at age 10. Now, so you think, all right, here's a family that doesn't believe in child marriage, but their daughter is married at 10. Every family belongs to a larger family and community, and this was a good catch. And so from the parents' point of view, fine. I met this woman in Dhirabai when she was in her 80s. She was still angry, right? She had never wanted to be married. She'd wanted to study. These were very smart little girls. All right. Now, the second daughter, you can see, is at the top on that side, on the top left. That's the second daughter. The picture of everybody in the family. The other daughter is also married by this time, 1916. She was married at about 12. And this is interesting. Again, the mother and father didn't really agree with child marriage, but the larger community and the larger family did. Now, and the child, the baby, is not there. That's a grandchild, so the first grandchild. Now, Krishna Bai, who I'm talking about, and some of you have read this, I've written about this in another article. In 1918, when she was 12 years old, this showing photograph was taken of her. And showing photographs from this era are absolutely fascinating. Most family collections have them, and they were not broadly distributed, but some accounts I have, maybe 12 or 13 were made, and they were given selectively. Her father had had a stroke by this time, so her father was not well. Krishna Bai went to Bombay to visit relatives. They took her on a tour of the city, stopped at a studio, and had this photo taken. So this is a photo taken not by her immediate family, but larger members of joint extended family. She showed me this and said, I wanted to stay in school. I had no investment in this, but what can you do? You're a child and your relatives take you there. All right, so she was able to go on to school. She continued, she got scholarships. The family had really poor financial position at this time because the father, who'd had a stroke, was no longer able to work. Her mother was in debt. The family was in debt. Her mother sold their house and they moved to a cottage on the Theosophical organizations at Adyar on their grounds. Krishna Bai was involved in everything. She was studying. She was in Girl Guides. She was meeting women in a Theosophical society, and everybody was encouraging her to go on with her studies. But larger extended family thought, what will we do with now a 16-year-old girl? And they insisted this second showing photograph be taken. I also have found other women who this happened to. Their marriage wasn't arranged. And a few years later, people say, let's try again with another photograph. Krishna Bai, this is what she told me. I looked as mean as possible, so no one would want to marry me. All right. We have no idea, right? But we know that they didn't have a suitor, or it becomes very complicated. Her father died. The family was very poor. Her mother took a job in a home for widows to make ends meet. There were 3 children to be educated. It was a very complicated time, and she got scholarships. So she went on to get a BA in zoology from Presidency College at Madras University. Now, the interesting thing she told me about that was that to go to the college, she had to ride a bicycle, and her brothers taught her how to do that. But, okay, when we're thinking about that early period, we're thinking about something in, around 1920, 1922. There are very few women riding bicycles. I mean, there's a historian who worked on this. How many girls rode a bicycle in the street around this time? So she talked about being criticized. She told me people said, what's a girl doing riding a bike? And of course, she had to face eve teasing, which wasn't called that. What was interesting, I think, is she remembered once she became so angry, she knocked a boy off his bicycle for harassing her. So maybe we have an early rebel here. In 1927, she was invited to give evidence at the age of consent committee. This is really a significant thing to happen to a young woman of 21. She had at this time started medical school and dropped out. Now, when she said she was chosen for this because she was proficient in English and already accustomed to public speaking. When she would show the photograph, she would tell me things I didn't expect. Like a photograph of graduating and talking about boys who bothered you because you rode a bike. In this case, she talked about what to wear. She was a Marathi woman, and they generally wore 9-yard saris, which you are familiar with. And that is worn by women after marriage. Before that, the half sari. So she said she had to go to this very public committee meeting, and she made up the way to wear her sari. It's a sort of combination, partly based on women in Adyar in a Theosophical society, somewhat based on what a young girl would wear. She was then got a job in Allahabad, and you think, this is interesting. We're talking about 1927, very few jobs for women, and not to move that far, but her brother was in Allahabad. So she lived with him. She taught at Crosswaith Girls' College, and she became a leader in this Bharat Scouts, an Indian version of Girl Scouts. You can see the salute is different. They didn't say, God save the Queen. They said, God save India, and they kind of reinvented the organization. In 1930, her mother picketed with the Salt March in the time of the Salt March civil disobedience, and her mother was jailed. So she left her job and returned immediately to Madras. And she was one of the founders of this Desh Savika Sangh, which organized the picketing of cloth and liquor stores. So she also worked with Swadeshi League for women to print and spin, and to spin and promote khadi. These women made salt on the beach, salt from the sea, not from a river. They were arrested and sent to jail. So she was sent to prison with many members of her own family. All right, I have to have a story with a romantic interest. Enter this Dr. Nimkar, a doctor practicing in Madras. When she and the other prisoners came out of jail, they were celebrated. There was a big party for these women, and one of the organizers was this Dr. Nimkar. Now, he's the first photograph. This is a Red Crescent. This is the Red Crescent medical mission during the Greek-Turkish War. So he's considerably older than her. He was a keen supporter of the nationalist movement, and he had heard her give a speech on the beach about making salt. But this man then became her suitor. Now, this is a slight disadvantage. So you've got 3 photos there. He was married, he had been married 3 times. And actually, there's a child in this first picture, his first wife. That's not their child, it's a relative. It's his first wife died in childbirth. Then his second marriage, his second wife had 1 daughter and then died in childbirth before the second son. His third wife had been a widow, had gone to Edinburgh to study. He met her in the UK and married her, and she died of tuberculosis. So it is interesting if you think the photograph collection of Krishnabai involves photographs of her husband's first 3 wives, and she knew a great deal about them. This is, for me, rather interesting. Now, he proposed to Krishnabai, and her mother and many of her friends were opposed to it. One, the obvious, right? He had had 3 wives who died, and she would be his 4th. That's maybe kind of someone we think might be unlucky. The second reason was the difference in ages. He was 45, she was 24. That's quite a gap. And that was, there's a gap. That wasn't, the first thing was he had been married 3 times and 3 wives had died. And there was also, her mother thought that this girl was so brilliant. It was just going to be a shame for her to stop that, get married, be all trapped in taking care of the house, and no longer a political activist. The mother was extremely ambitious for her daughter. But they were married, and actually then, you see the picture of her going, it's here. She had started medical school, dropped out. Her husband said, I'm much older. You're likely going to be a widow. You need a career. You need to be earning your own living. And he encouraged her to go to medical school, which she did. All right. So they were married in 1931, a very simple ceremony. And Krishnabai returned with her husband. This is a visit to the family home in Pune and meeting all the extended family. Her husband is holding his daughter from the second marriage, her child. So he's holding, and if seated, okay, on the far right is his daughter, who was only 3 years younger than Krishnabai, than his wife. And she already had 1 son, and then this is the new baby. So just getting a picture of the family. Krishnabai, this is a picture in 1940. As a medical student, she continued to be active, and one thing she was doing is organizing the Governor Medical Stores Workers Union. She also worked with the Women's Medicine Club, the Madras Women's Organization, the Madras Student Organization, and the Chakraborty Spinning Club of Madras. I'm trying to get through. I'll skip, there's not every detail. I selected photographs. This is a mother, child. She had this child in 1938, Ulhas. And her husband, you can see they're back in uniform, and this was 1942. And if you look at Krishnabai, you can't tell all this, but she was dressed in khadi. She's wearing the Gandhian uniform. Her husband's wearing a military uniform, and he had this special little uniform made for his daughter. Now, Krishnabai in 1940, Gandhi called for individual satyagraha. And she did it, and she was jailed. Her daughter was like 3 years old, and what she remembered was every day her husband brought the daughter to wave to mommy when she's 3 years old in prison. All right, so she goes to prison. Her husband he's a nationalist, but he believed in defending England during wartime. So he volunteered again. In 1942, he volunteered to serve in the medical corps. He left for Iraq, but before he left, this photograph is taken. Now, I think I was a bit curious, you know, two uniforms here, they're not really compatible, maybe supporting Gandhi and then supporting the war effort in World War II. I asked her about this, just how did this work? She said before we married, we agreed that we would disagree. And she said we recognized we both were very stubborn, had very strong opinions. And then she said when it came to acting on our opinions, they remained supportive of the other person. And this is a quote from her. She said, you see, we loved each other very much. So the kind of history of emotions comes into this. I'm just showing a couple more pictures. Ulhas was completing high school. They moved from Madras back to Pune. And Krishnabai resumed private practice as a doctor and remained a doctor for years. Her husband died, I'm just not sure if I've got the date. All right, and I'll just go into this. Oh no, it's a little later. 1952, she decided to stand for parliament. She was not elected. But her old friend, Durgabai Deshmukh, this says it'll terminate the program. Okay. No, just ignore it. Oh, just ignore it. Oh, you can't see it. All right, I can see something on the screen. Her friend Durgabai Deshmukh became the first chairperson of the Central Social Welfare Board in 1953, and she drew on Krishnabai to be a special officer in social education in community projects administration. And all I have is this kind of photograph. I don't have the original. She didn't have these photographs. She started working with rural development, very different field for her, and became a kind of expert in the field. She wrote reports, commented on projects, and attended international conferences. Now, in this work, you can kind of look at her views of women. She's working now with rural women, not Gandhian women. She really focused on their role as housewives and tended to ignore their extra domestic duties. Like many women were engaged in some kind of income generating work or something, but that wasn't her field. She also regarded them as unable to really understand their own needs and unable to speak for themselves. So her view of rural women is somewhat patronizing. But two things that really emerged: she insisted on scientific surveys to see what worked, to understand women's needs, and she really argued against wholesale adaptation of Western ideas. And you know how disastrous those were in this development period. Now, even though she did not see rural women as able to articulate their own needs, she advocated for their involvement. So early development projects were notoriously focused on men, and she started talking about women in development. Her husband died in 1962. She retired from public life for probably a very brief period, but then returned to politics, especially during the 1970s. During Mrs. Gandhi's emergency, she had her own little newspaper that she just produced at home, and then she was an elderly woman in her 70s, traveled across the country to distribute it. So she's doing something very subversive. After the emergency, she became involved with the consumer movement, and she just kind of never stopped trying to organize neighborhoods to demand goods and services. Okay, so I'm going to leave that, then just move to my completion. She lived, and think as you'll recognize, a life of extraordinary activism. We can think of her in the 1920s being an activist, and we can think of her being an activist in, the late 1970s. And when I, got to know her and got to see her photographs and read all that I've collected on her, I thought that it made me think of a conversation I had with Renuka Rai. Renuka Rai showed me a photograph of her aunt on a bicycle in 1900 in Calcutta. And I was a little shocked, like how unusual it is to find a photograph of a girl on a bicycle around 1900. And I asked her, like, how could that happen? And she said, well, that was my family. That was my family. And then she talked about growing up. And she said it wasn't till she was much older that she realized how different families were in their attitudes to what girls could do, that she felt, you know, her aunt did it, her sister did it, her second cousin did it. This is what we did. Now, I'm not going to go through, I've sort of talked about Krishnabai's childhood experiences, I think, that prepared her for a life of activism. Her mother, her father, the Theosophical Society against child marriage, but agreed with that. Her mother with women who asked for the vote. Her sisters who were married early but didn't like it and told her. So as a child, she had an elder sister saying, I don't like what they did to me. So she has a lot of experiences, I think. And she, as a child, was aware of patriarchal laws. Especially, remember, she talked about against child marriage. She was also in activism. She gave evidence. She worked in Allahabad. That was unusual. The Girl Scouts, the Bharat Scouts, a political leader in 1930s. You know, married a man of her choice. And she knew that women and women's ideas and women's experiences were left out of much public discussion. So I would argue she suffered from laws, institutions, and customs that assigned men and women to different roles and valued women less than a man. This woman didn't win when she ran for parliament, she didn't get elected. And she was certainly very capable. Like somebody we think had all the background and all the knowledge and experience to be elected, but she was not. Her life was one, I think, fighting for women's rights, but without blaming patriarchy. That never comes out. I knew her when she talked about what was going on with American feminism, and she did not like what was happening with American, what we call second wave feminism. She just thought it had no relevance at all for India. Now, I just look at her life, and I'm curious why she didn't examine and talk about what we might call sexism or patriarchy today. And I wondered, and this is just what I'm saying is what I've been trying to think about, is it the family experiences where there's a lot of love and support from the men in the family, and then after marriage, a lot of love and support, which means, like Ramesh Nebo said, the battles of women don't need to be fought in the home. And this was kind of what I'm thinking about. She was close to the family she was born in, and she was very close to her husband. So I'm just kind of really asking that. At the beginning, I asked why women like her did not analyze male-female relationships or how gender affected their lives. And I'm thinking that the answer might lie in thinking about their experiences within families and after marriage. Like Rameshwari Nehru, Krishnabai did not make the home the battlefield. And she had little sympathy for women who did. She characterized the second wave fame as, she'd call it liberation, right? Women's lib, this was her statement. And that meant to her, liberation, women's liberation meant distancing yourself as a woman from family and community and privileging individualism. So I am offering this not as sort of finished work or anything, but something that I'm pondering about and trying to, tease apart in the history of women like Krishnabai. So thank you. Get my water. Okay, thank you. Maybe I can sit here.
Yes.
Okay.
I think she deserves a better rounder of applause. Absolutely fantastic, ma'am. It was fascinating to see a story unravel that has so much of the personal in it, but that personal will always lead us to the outer world and allow us to explore wider relations and then give us the history as well. So thank you so much for connecting those dots and giving our students, especially who do read and study how to use an archive. This is a perfect example of how you can actually will be able to do it. So thank you so much. As I said, traditionally we don't have question answer sessions in a memorial lecture, but since it's a special occasion for us to have Professor Forbes here with us, so we'll have a very short and a very brief interactive session. If you have a question, please put your hand up. Limit yourself to one question and be brief so that we can get as many opinions in as much as possible. I need a volunteer. Sarsi, I know your hand is up, but can I ask you to please come forward? Okay, Koena is also here. Just take a microphone from here. ওনাকে একটা হ্যান্ড মাইক দিও আর ওদের একটা ওনাকে একটা হ্যান্ড মাইক দিও Ma'am, will you take one question at a time or?
Hello.
Okay. Okay, maybe we can go from there are so many hands. Maybe we can start with some of our guests, maybe. I saw a hand over there, yes. Koina, can you hand him over the mic? She will take one question at a time, so we'll take one question at a time.
You know, sorry, my name is Amit Sen. Professor Forbes, if it's possible only, if you can go back some photographs where you showed a photograph of something called Bharat Scouts, because there's something a bit odd about. I mean, I thought, can you go back? I think it's the. Yeah.
Okay, next one. Yes.
Now, this must have been some kind of. It's not part of the. You see, at this time there was the Boy Scouts and the Girl Guides.
Yes.
And there was no Bharat Scouts at that time. So, and anyway, this would not have been the uniform for the Girl Guides. So, I was just wondering what this is.
Okay, can I? Is this on?
Yes, this is on.
Okay, this was a subversive, and actually, people who've worked on the history of Girl Scouts and things, Girl Guides, right? And Krishna Bai belonged to Girl Guides in Madras, but this is when she goes to Crosswaith Women's College, and it's in Allahabad. So there's the Nehru family there.
Okay.
Her brother, got to know members of the Nehru family. Gandhi had come. All of these. There's a whole nationalist thing. And then they form these Bharat Scouts. I haven't found, not that I've looked every place, but I've asked other people working on Girl Guides have said, what is this? So it was like a subversive organization, and I'm not sure how widespread it was. We have a lot of, all right, we find this in a photograph and it becomes so interesting. She said they had a different, and yet, it's hard to find out more about it. Oh,
Can I intervene?
yes.
Bharat Scouts and Guides was the name of the organization. They didn't call it separately a Girl Guide.
That happened
No.
after independence.
No, but this is,
Bharat Scouts and Guides. Previously, it followed the traditional British system of Boy Scouts and Girl Guides.
No. Actually, just if I can interject, in this is a subversive one. This is not connected. Okay, This is not connected with Girl Scouts at all. It is like saying we shouldn't have Girl Scouts. We're going to form our own nationalist organization, and so they deliberately had a different uniform. Obviously, it's Indian. They have a different salute. They didn't say God save the king or anything. They said God save India. So it's like an alternative, subversive organization with young women. And what I know people who've worked on the history of scouting. They say, or maybe somebody now has worked on this and found out more about it, but what I know is this is in her records and her photograph archives, but I haven't seen other ones. That doesn't mean it doesn't exist. We have a lot of work to do digging around in old, not photographs in archives, but photographs in people's family collections. That's okay. Okay.
Next question, maybe in the back, Koena, on to my right.
Good morning, ma'am. It's very nice to meet you. I'm Manjini Mandal and I am a student of Bethune College. So, ma'am, I just wanted to ask you that I have seen as you were going through the session, you have told that Krishna Bai's family was very supportive in a sense that where she was married she had a supportive husband and she have also got supportive parents and ma'am, as you have told that she was an activist, so ma'am, if I take the case of activist, so during that time do each and every feminist activist had that family culture, or does it varied according to their caste or gender? So ma'am, if you can please.
That's absolutely a lovely, fabulous question. All right.
Thank you so much,
And
ma'am.
so I actually started thinking about family culture because of people like Renuka Rai, who said to me, well, that was my family. We never thought about that idea and the support she had. I don't know how much you know about Renuka Rai and her history and her activism, and both her family and then her married family, both cases, support. But what I've been interested in, the reason I start to look at this is as a historian, I often try to find women throughout their lives. You know, you find them in an organization. There were some women who they were very active before marriage, and then you lose them. And if I got to interview them, sometimes they would tell me a story of, and the photographs. Sometimes I would meet women who were, been activists when they were young. This was years later when I was looking at women born around 1900 to 1910. And I was able to meet them because this is 1980, long time ago. Some of them said, oh, I was very active in this organization. I did this and that. Then my father-in-law got sick, right? And now I'm doing home duties. Or someone else would say, I was very active. And then and then my husband's job, many of them were like, her father was revenue service, right? So many of them had those professional jobs, saying, oh, we were such and such, and then we moved. And then there's new circumstances. So, one woman I'd met, this was in Karnataka, she was married very young. She started to do some of the demonstrations like 1930. Then her husband died. And she was sent from Bombay, where she lived with her husband, back to Udupi to live with her parents. And she said, all they wanted me to do was pray all day. She was 16, right? 16, 17. Then actually, the demonstrations, the marches against liquor shops, all that sort of thing started, and she got her parents' permission to join. She went to prison. She told me it was the happiest time of my life. Not what we think. No, just think of this young child, almost a child, a teenage widow. I think actually this work is kind of what I'm trying to do is based on many interviews I had. I know that if a woman who is an activist married into the wrong family, right? The family that goes like, absolutely no way you're stepping outside the house. Our women don't do that. Your career ended. So I have been thinking a lot about marriage, about families who showed me showing pictures and then telling me which families they gave those to. Sometimes people were very concerned about what their daughter's life would be after. I mean, I think everybody was concerned, will they be well off? Is it a nice family? But not everybody was concerned about the daughter becoming an activist later. It's sort of tentative, trying to think about family culture. But it's a great question. The other, which I didn't deal with, is the caste class of these activists. What happens with the nationalist movement? We don't have a lot of data that's unfortunate, like rural women. And I do know I have some pictures of women coming out of jail in Lucknow in 1930 being felicitated. I talked to the organizers, and they told me in that situation, no, it's Lahore, I'm sorry, some of the husbands were really against it. And the women leaders who were from prominent families, in one case the Nehru family, went and talked to these men. And that's as like, you know, you're a powerful person, you talk to this husband, say, you better support your wife, right? Yeah, so I think there's a lot of questions here as much as I'm just trying to think about this. Thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am.
Fascinating. We have more questions. Maybe on the left side now.
You've got a couple of young men up there. Okay.
Yes, a couple of young men. Just give the mic. Yes.
Thank you, Dr. Forbes. It was an extremely intriguing talk. You yourself, in your Women in Modern India, you wrote about that the women activists, especially women in the AIWC and different other women organizations, they had a certain apathy towards the category of work, where work, especially for women, where it was basically looked upon as a certain kind of a sad compulsion that required welfareist approaches. And this welfareist approaches actually did not improve women's working conditions, and companies, especially factories, fired women, and they were replaced by male employees. This idea of apathy towards women's work, does this continue in case of Krishnabai as well? Because when you showed that slide about the rural development program, she was more concerned about, I think, their domestic arena, their domestic realm. But why this apathy of recognition of women as working women, as work as necessary? Because a lot of people, a lot of memoirs of that time, even in the post-independence period, they talk about working being a very emancipatory situation for women. Why has this been ignored by the activists of the yesteryears? If you can please talk about it.
Oh, wow, these are really good questions. Krishnabai, she didn't look at these rural women and say, oh, I mean, she taught them different recipes. Still that focus on the domestic realm. And, you know, this made me, you just said that. I was thinking about Sharla Devi, who got a job in 1895, right? Went off to Mysore. And everybody is like, oh, this is so terrible. And she actually, her idea was, why can't I? Why can't women have a job? And then, all right, certain things happened. We don't know exactly what. She came back and she kind of apologized about it. And everybody's, see, that working outside the home is what poor women do. So, Shamita Sen's mother is there. Shamita writes about those women working in factories. And of course, that wasn't a good job, but it was that they were unfortunate women. They were widowed, they'd been abandoned. Hoimebati Shen that I worked on, she was a widow. She went to medical school because she could actually earn a living and there was a scholarship. But that idea that if you are, ideally you're married and men are the breadwinners and the supporters of the family. When Krishnabai's her sisters were married, they were married to men who had good incomes. The idea is we cannot pass up this wonderful opportunity. I guess this is in the United States. Right now we're we're not quite sure where we're going, but a sort of a retreat from the workforce by women. And the argument is, and this is true here, it is hard to do it all. And that question, Krishnabai actually didn't have a child till 1938, right? And then I've talked to other women from her generation who told me, oh, I was so lucky. My mother-in-law was wonderful and she took care of all the work. Other ones said, my mother-in-law was against it. So I think that idea of working outside the home perhaps still isn't widely accepted, that is a great thing to women. And all over the world, you know this already, that women are kind of going on strike. We have a less, people are worried about it in the United States. I read an article about southern India where the women's fertility rates are falling, kind of like Italy. I think Italy is 1.0, and they say to reproduce the society, you need 2.5 children, right? So how do we see the fact that women are having less children, other than the fact that they're kind of going on strike about how hard it is to do everything? Work, earn money, take care of the family, take care of the children, take care of all of those things that really still are not shared. That I don't know. I think it is interesting, though, that you find women writing, those activist women, those fabulously activist women still taking that approach that you're not going to, educate women for getting jobs. They're not pushing the job market. And that is, again, not addressing the way in which work was gendered. I rarely find any woman in those women that I studied complaining about housework. I mean, Charlotte David didn't do it, right? and look at Gandhi. He wanted women to be angels of the home. At the same time, they should be part of the movement. Again, he supported that traditional idea of woman as whatever we want to call it, the goddess of the household, the angel of the household. There is something about women's work that still isn't, or wasn't in that period, broadly accepted. But it's a wonderful question. I hope you're in history.
No, I'm from a literature department.
Oh, okay. You've got a good feel. Okay.
Okay, show of hands again. Maybe they were the ones who first put their hands up.
It was a very wonderful lecture from you, ma'am. I have a question that being in a supportive family, her father and his mother was also a member of some activist organization, but isn't it that the society that is accepting the child marriage is also affecting the thinking of her family that made her sisters having the child marriage?
I think so. And I think, this is why Krishnabai said in that second photo, I looked as mean as possible so no one would want to marry me. Now, we don't have any proof, but at that time, her father was very ill. And, I think it's not a good time for a marriage. The other thing, she was like 16 by then. And in terms of my research on women in this era, some families rejected girls, actually rejected girls because they had, in one case, almost 3 years of school, right? Or 3.5 years of schooling, and rejected as a bride because we don't want those brides. So it's quite, it could be, actually, if things had been a little different, her father had been well, maybe they would have gotten a marriage proposal, and her father would have said, well, even though I don't think we should, that she could have been married at 14 or 16. And I have met women who tell me that their activist lives were ruined because their family just didn't support it. I think also I have one interesting case where her father opposed, this is someone who her father opposed her joining the Gandhian movement, so she joined the more radical movement. So kind of run. So you also have, I think there are a lot of stories here. It's hard to sometimes I have what people call little stories. Our partner's nodding. She has a lot of what we call, half stories, fragments, little pieces. And we don't know how to put them all together in the larger picture.
We will take two more questions. A show of একটু সামনে চলে এসো।
Thank you, Professor Forbes, for your wonderful presentation. Myself, Shoptor Sushil. I have a question. You had talked about the post-colonial period as well. You had talked about that Mrs. Ramabai, she had taken up the activity to just spread the news during Indira Gandhi's emergency. I want to just ask you that you were saying that the family is responsible behind making the women activists at some point of time. But my question is that here, do you think really the family plays the important role, or the larger role is being played by the individual consciousness of the women, or the national consciousness of the women more? So what do you like to say about this thing?
So actually, I hadn't thought very carefully about this. I met her. Actually, let's see. I met her. I'm trying to remember. I met her before at this time. So I couldn't believe it that what she was doing. And all I know is that she was politically in this position. I also think by this time her husband was deceased. Her daughter was grown up. She wasn't financially dependent on that one daughter. And there's a certain way that reaching a certain age, if you are financially secure, that perhaps you have a certain amount of freedom. But it's a very interesting question. She was very much respected by that time in Pune among people who had been her patient, as a medical doctor. And I think that's the only thing I could say, that she had the respect of the community. So maybe at that point, if there is no family, it's the respect of a community. But I will think of other women I've worked on, like Hoimabati Shen, who was in Chinchur. She was very dependent on her family as she got older, and I didn't meet her, but she writes about certain, daughter-in-laws, the problem with them, people didn't agree with her doing this and that. So maybe that's a good question for people looking at.
Don't you think that the individual consciousness here surpass the consciousness of the community, especially whenever we are talking about the family? Mostly we are stressing on the males of the family. They are making the women in the forefront. But why we are not thinking that the women themselves can make them in the forefront of the activity? That I am asking, actually.
Oh, you mean when they're younger? If I'm thinking about Krishna Bai when she's 21 or 26, I think, at least from my knowledge of that period and today, it's very hard to strike out on your own, and particularly difficult for women. So for her, had she not have the support of her family, the question would have been, where would she live? Like in 1930, a woman who was single isn't going to be able to walk up and rent an apartment. Right, I mean, so there's a lot of just practical day-to-day things. There is not, Krishna Bai, Krishna Bai actually, she was sexually harassed also at political meetings, but she doesn't like to talk about that. It's like, well, I'll tell you this, but, right. And that kind of like she could talk about somebody in the street sexually harassing her, but she didn't want to talk publicly about political activities when she was older. She worked, I found it also interesting, she worked with the anti-drink campaigns. Those were, again, post-independence. She knew those women were beaten by their husbands. But the whole thing was, you have to make him stop drinking. She never thought you should leave this guy, just walk out and strike out on your own. It was maybe in a way that she couldn't conceive of life without family and community. And maybe that is what I'm reaching here a little bit for the history of emotions, which are hard to explore. So again, I'm saying this is just tentative. And maybe some of the young people will take up questions like this and start asking them, think about how do we research? And how do we research these things? For me, the fact that she was harassed and then she worked with women who were beaten in their own homes. She never told those women, turn around and thrash him, which is what she would have done. It's very interesting, and I thank you for pushing me.
Last question. And একদম শেষে একজন হাত তুলে আছে দেখো।
Do we have last question?
Thank you, Professor Forbes, for the very insightful lecture. So my question is, I would actually like to ask you, a lot of members who were part of the Brahmo Samaj in Bengal, so a very similar thing has also happened here as well. So they used to marry off their daughters and at a very early age, but they used to advocate against child marriages. So this is a very personal question. I want to ask you your take on this. So do you think this somehow, undermines their credibility as reformers?
I think there's a lot more that undermines credibility as reformers. And I think particularly my work with Hoimabati Shen's memoir, she was the Brahmo Samaj, right? And she certainly writes a lot about patriarchy, exploitation of women. I would go that far. About, double-sided, what you say in public, this kind of reformer. I think that's there, probably with most reformers. I was going to say it was kind of interesting working in a more modern period with Sharla Devi Chodurani's experiences with Gandhi. And the whole thing is she started wearing khadi in 1920. And she swore she would never wear, her silks and her wonderful saris again. And then she complained about Sabarmati Ashram, where his wife and the other deeply committed Gandhians were not using khadi products, and the women weren't wearing khadi. And this becomes, a kind of place where you're saying, well, this is what you're supposed to be about, but you really aren't. So, no, maybe we are all a little like this. We espouse things, consumerism, environmentalism, and so on, anti-consumerism, and then we use plastic. Every time I do that, I think I should fine myself for using plastic.
Thank you so much. Thank you to Professor Forbes, and thank you to our wonderful audience. We are right at the end of the program, which we would bring to an end. But before that, again, one official thing that we get to do is a vote of thanks. I will request Dr. Riddhi Bhattacharya to do the honors. But before the vote of thanks, I would like to request Mr. Shunandan Rai Chaudhuri of Sampark Publication to kindly come up on the dais. They would like to honor Professor Forbes for today's lecture, and they are also the media partner of this memorial lecture. Thank you. Dr. Bhattacharya.
Good afternoon, everyone. It is my honor and privilege to deliver the vote of thanks today. First and foremost, I would like to express my deepest gratitude to our distinguished speaker, Professor Geraldine Forbes, for sharing her valuable insights and thoughts with us. Your talk has been both enlightening and inspiring, providing us with a lot of food for thought, and definitely, this fascinating story of Krishnabai Nimkar. So a round of applause for Professor Forbes. I would like to extend my sincere thanks to our partner, Women's History Conclave, particularly Professor Aparna Bandopadhyay and Professor Bhaswati Chatterjee. Aparna Di and Bhaswati Di, you both were instrumental in helping us organize this event. To our other partners, Champort Publishing House, particularly Mr. Shunandan Roy Chaudhary and also Arundhati, and also to our media partner, Eastern Review magazine. A heartfelt thanks to our principal, Dr. Madhumanjari Mondol, who is always encouraging us in all our endeavors. Our vice principal, Dr. Supratim Das, the senior most teacher in the Department of History, from whom we are always learning something new. Our other IMC, that is Internal Management Committee members, that is Dr. Upendranath Nandi, our bursar, Dr. Shamrat Bhattacharjee, our IQAC coordinator, Dr. Indrani Kaur, our Teachers Council secretary, our Senator Secretary, Dr. Bidisha Sinha. The head of the Department of History, Sri Deboduti Banerjee, though unfortunately could not be with us, I'm sure he would have been very happy if he was present here for today's program. My colleagues from our department and also colleagues from other departments as well. Our technical support teams, I express our gratitude for ensuring everything ran smoothly. Your behind-the-scene efforts often go unnoticed, but we are essentially very, very in awe of your duties that you always do. To all our attendees, distinguished guests, friends, and colleagues from other colleges, universities, and institutes, thank you for your participation. Your active presence made this event truly memorable. Lastly, but not by no means the least, a special thank you to Dr. Srimoy Guha-Thakurata, Associate Professor, Department of History. Srimoy, my dear friend, not only was the compare for today's program, but she was the pillar and foundation for today's program. Without her insight and her eye for minute details, we would have been lost. And a round of applause for Srimoy. So let us continue to build on the knowledge and connections we have gained today. Thank you and have a wonderful evening.
Thank you so much, Riddhi, for those kind words. To the audience, we have come to the end of our technical session, but there is an arrangement for slight refreshment, as is the tradition in this college. Kindly proceed towards room number 3, right across the assembly hall, to have some tea and packets. And also to our student volunteers, thank you so much for being with us. And again, I request you to kindly guide the guests towards room number 3. Thank you so much.